tempted to give you my full spiel on Moxa, including all the discussion about the different types and the different methods of applying moxibustion, but I figure that you probably know that already, and there's no point in telling people what they know already. So instead I thought I would, rather than just skip the introduction to Moxa completely, just pick out an interesting narrative that happened in my career. And this brings to light an incredible thing about Moxa, and I hope that it will encourage those people who don't use Moxa very much to consider using it, at least in some circumstances. So this goes alongside my session on the Thunderfire and Miraculous needling, but this just is intended as a taster into just how exciting and how interesting moxibustion can be. And in order to understand the narrative I'm going to present in a few minutes, I'd like to just do a quick review of some basic cell biology. In a sense, we have the qi mechanism, the traditional idea of the qi mechanism in Chinese medicine, and that kind of echoes what we find in modern cellular biology. And here is a beautiful image, which is a sort of pastiche. It isn't a genuine microscopic image of the inside of a cell, but it is a pastiche. It's an accurate representation that's brought together, as should we say, a collage of cellular activity. And here on the left we can see in the middle there a mitochondria, myreca, and I can identify. Towards the bottom we can see some receptors built into a cell membrane. We can see the endoplasmic reticulum, and we can see, I think on the top right there, we've got a representation of a gap junction, the communication points between cells. Within the cell, we see the qi mechanism seen from the viewpoint of molecular biology. Now, the qi mechanism, of course, involves transportation and transformation. It involves things coming in and out of taking in and expelling things. It involves separation of clear and turbid. It involves all those aspects that the ancients in Chinese medicine discovered. We can also view cell biology in a similar way, but we understand it in terms of a dance of proteins, a massively complex dance of thousands of proteins, all interacting with each other to regulate cell activity. And this, of course, when it's working beautifully, is a prime example of order, where everything is regulating, self-regulating, fixing mistakes or what have you as we go along. And of course, when things begin to go wrong, then we get what in Chinese medicine we call luan, or chaos. And so I think it's interesting just to have a look at this mechanism. Obviously, proteins are the action words, the verbs of everything that happens in the body. Everything that does anything really is protein. Even the transcription of DNA, of course, is organised by proteins. So here's a representation of that process happening, with messenger RNA being transcripted to generate proteins, which of course are simply long chains of amino acids, just those 23 amino acids laid out in a long chain. And when I was studying biochemistry a long time ago, the belief was that once you turn out this long chain of polypeptides, that all the bonds between those different polypeptides would come together and create a 3D structure that would create a working protein, such as insulin or hemoglobin or what have you, that would then function in the world. Now we know that actually they need a bit of help, and that they need what are called chaperone proteins to make sure that they fold in the right way and they don't misfold and thereby misfunction. So the thing about the proteins as well is that they suffer damage, and if proteins become denatured or become damaged or injured, then they're no longer functioning properly. They're unable to do their job properly. And again, when I was young, the belief was in biochemistry and cell biology that if a protein was denatured, it was knackered, it was useless now, it wouldn't be able to do its function anymore, and so would have to be broken down and recycled, so to speak. So really, this business of proteins becoming denatured is pathology. It's things going wrong, cellular pathology, things going wrong. And these things that go wrong are due to a loss of the structure of proteins. They become denatured, they lose their proper nature. So the sort of things that make this happen, that make proteins lose their structure, there's a lot of them really. There's the way that we have built-in mechanisms, antioxidant mechanisms that are intended to protect against this damage due to oxidation, because the cell just running by itself generates a certain amount of inflammation, generates some toxic byproducts or what have you that tend to, if they're not cleared away enough, will tend to cause protein damage or increase the risk that proteins will become denatured. Then, of course, there's the exposure to irritants and toxins that might be internally generated within the cell, or toxins that come from the outside, environmental toxins and poisonous substances. Even things that we consume can have some negative effects and some damaging effects on the cell mechanism. And of course, normally these are being repaired. There are proteins that will repair those things going wrong, but as we get older, those lose their edge and they become less effective at keeping on top of all the mistakes that happen. There's the question of blood circulation. As we get older, our blood circulation loses some of its vigour, and so we don't get quite enough nutrition delivered to the cells, and also at the same time, alongside that, we don't get such efficient removal of waste materials that the in and out of the G mechanism begins to weaken. There's also the issue of inflammatory cytokines, that there are communicating chemicals from inflamed tissues that float around in the bloodstream and begin to affect other tissues. So if you have a very inflamed liver from an alcohol problem, or you have inflamed lungs from smoking or from some other reason, then those organs release inflammatory substances that then are communicated to other cells. So inflammatory cytokines can increase the inflammation levels within cells, and thereby increase the risk that these proteins will lose their structure and function. Heat damages proteins, it tends to denature them. Even physical shaking can take a complex protein and jigger it up so that it loses its shape. And also there's the question of the way that proteins react with sugars in the body, especially small sugars like glucose, that will glycolate proteins. They'll react with the proteins themselves in order to clump them up. And just to give you one instance of this, this is believed to be the reason that people with suffering from diabetes will begin to get cataracts in the lens of the eye, that the high levels of sugar that they will experience sometimes will denature the proteins in the eye and move them from being clear to being turbid. So this we've got a whole raft of cell stresses that are tending to want to make proteins lose their function and lose their shape. And this just affects so many different things. For example, receptors are proteins. Those receptors that are responding to, say, hormones or cellular communication, the communications within the body. If those proteins lose their shape, if those receptor proteins lose their shape, then things don't really work properly anymore. So, and these misshapen proteins tend to clog things up. They become a mess in the cell, which in ideal circumstances then triggers cell death. The cell goes, oh, we're no use anymore. We're just going to quietly see ourselves out. Thank you very much. So, of course, it's possible that the very proteins that orchestrate cell death, can also lose their function and become denatured, and so the cell then doesn't do the right thing and see that it's reached its sell-by date and break down. And that's the situation. That's one of the contributory causes, of course, to cancer, that the cells just forget how to die, and so they continue to live in an aberrant way. So this is my understanding, at least, of my simple understanding of the way these things work. And of course, as we get older, we become more prone to inflammatory conditions. We become less able to have anti-inflammatory activity to counter this damage. So this is when things start to go wrong. Indeed, it's even difficult to think of any illness that does not involve a breakdown of the cellular qi mechanism. And that's quite interesting because the ancient Chinese thinkers described illness and in terms of a breakdown of the qi mechanism primarily. And in modern pathology, we're beginning to reach the same kind of conclusions, that it's a breakdown in all the normal functional activities of cells.